Kurchatov, formerly known as Moscow 400, Semipalatinsk 21 and Konechnoye station. It was a classified city in Kazakhstan built right after the end of World War II. Only a few knew about the city's existence. It was impossible to find it on maps. Scientists who conducted nuclear tests lived in this ghost town.
Біздің туып өскен жеріміз кезіндегі ертеректе Семей облысы болды. Кейін Шығыс Қазақстан облысы, осы Семей өңірінде арқылы деген аудан болған бұрын.
I was born in the former Semipalatinsk region in the east of the republic. There was once an Abirali district where many famous people came from. It was a great place. The first atomic bomb was tested for the first time at the Semipalatinsk test site, right at the foot of Delegen mountain. There were several villages nearby: Kaynar, Dogalan, Abirali, Akbulak, and Socialist Kazakhstan. I was born in the latter village.
So Degелең тауының жанында жарылыпты. Оның маңайында 6 ауылдық округ бар. Біреу Кайнар деп аталады. Доғалаң деген ауыл бар. Абыралы, Ақбұлақ дейді. Сосын социалистік Қазақстан деген ауыл болды. Сол Қазақстан деген ауылда тұрдық.
Oljaz Kasim's village was only 90 kilometers away from the epicenter of the explosion. Eyewitnesses said that they saw the first test in August 1949. First, there was a bright flash in the sky, followed by a huge, growing, fiery mushroom. The scene was mesmerizing that only a few people realized that it was a real test of survival.
Енді біздің ата-бабаларымыз, туысқандарымыз, қаншама ауылдастарымыз осы Семей полигонының зардабын тартып, көбісі ертерек көз жұмып кетті.
The consequences of the explosions were very bad for the villages. People died and most of them were young. Scientists likened the tests at the Semipalatinsk test site to the Third World War, given that it caused similar damage than the Second World War. The bombs tested here were 20 times more powerful than the ones dropped onto Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Нагасаки мен Хиросимаға тасталған атом бомбасынан әлдеқайда ондаған 20 есе күшті сондай атом бомбасы болған екен.
Мен өзім Семей жеріндегі бұрынғы Семей облысы Мақаншы ауданында дүниеге келгенмін. Бірақ саналы ғұмырымды Семей қаласында өткіздім. Тақырыпқа байланысты келетін болсақ, сол Семей қаласында алғаш.
I was born in the Makash district of the Semipalatinsk region, but I spent my entire adult life in Semey. I studied and worked there. I was still a student when the tests were conducted. I remember that we were very proud of it. For us, we were proud that an important research is being done in our country, in our historical land. Well, that's what we were told and we believed.
Сондай бір мақтанышты, сондай бір сезім, өйткені бұл әлем бойынша, сол кездегі кеңес үкіметі бойынша біздің Семейде ғана жарылады екен деген ақпаратқа біз керемет кәдімгідей өзімізді бір мақтан тұтып, өйткені сол кездегі ақпарат сондай болды.
A member of the Writers' Union, poetess Almakhan Muhammad Kalakizi recalls that the walls were shaking when the tests were conducted, but people ignored it as they believed that the tests were necessary. It was what science needed, it was what their country needed, therefore it was what they needed too.
Сол кездегі ұғым сондай болды. Семей қаласында жоғарғы оқу орнын оқыған кезде, жатақханада тұрған кезде.
This was our attitude. When I was studying in Semey, I lived in a hostel located on the banks of Irtish. Every week we'd hear the bombs explode. Since the test started at the test site, our walls started to tremble and we felt excited. Of course, we have an atomic bomb exploding and we're conducting a research.
Сезім болады.
Начнем с того, что само ядерное оружие, атомная бомба, она в конце 40-х годов виделась вот как некий такой.
Let's start with the nuclear weapon itself. The atomic bomb was seen in the late 1940s as a super weapon that could solve all political problems. After the United States used it in Japan, the Soviet Union began to try very quickly to solve their own weapons backlog.
Решить эту проблему вот этого отставания вооружений.
Historians recall that the world's first atomic bomb was tested in the United States in June 1945 at the Alamogordo test range. The news was personally informed by then US President Harry Truman to USSR leader Joseph Stalin. Stalin immediately ordered his men to speed up his own weapons development. The person who led the project was Igor Kurchatov, a young scientist who was only 42 at the time. He was one of the first scientists in the country to study atomic nucleus physics. A special testing site or a polygon was needed, and the question was where. The place understandably must be a secret.
Поэтому старались найти место, во-первых, в плане информационной безопасности наиболее удаленное.
So we searched for a place, somewhere far from the western borders in order to ensure our information security. The place should be quite deserted, well, partially deserted, and there should be a railway nearby. In the end, we identified 3 places at the border of Karaganda, Pavlodar and Semipalatinsk regions. It's impossible to say that these areas are deserted. For Kazakhstan, the places were fairly densely populated.
Хотя сказать, что местность безлюдная нельзя. Для Казахстана это достаточно густонаселенная была местность.
The well-being of the local population was ignored. In terms of security, the area was perfect and it was next to the railway. The construction of the test site began in 1947 and it was completed in just 2 years, built by 15,000 people, mostly prisoners. One of the first developments of the test site was the experimental field with a diameter of 20 kilometers. It was 70 kilometers from the residential area and twice as far from Semipalatinsk. Towers were built on the field for measurements with all the necessary devices. The launch was scheduled for August 29.
Внимание, внимание! Осталось 5 минут.
Within minutes, scientists saw ruined buildings, industrial factories razed to the ground, mangled planes, and black smoke rushing into the sky. Radioactive substances reached the neighboring regions, including Usk-Kamenogorsk city as well as the Altai territory of Russia. On the first day of testing, the population was exposed to 120 rem of radiation, and within a month, the radiation doubled. The normal radiation level recommended by the Ministry of Health was several times lower. The truth was only revealed in the 1990s. Head of the region, Kashirim Bostayev, wrote a letter to the president of Kazakhstan. He was worried about the children as they were exposed to radiation levels higher than the adults.
Енді осы семей полигонының қасіреті қаншама деп айтып жатамыз. Сол кезінде жаңағы Бақия Атшабаров деген медицина ғылымдарының докторы зерттеген кезде осы уақытқа дейін, жаңа полигон атылмай тұрғанға дейінгі Семей өңірінде
Academician Baqia Atshabarov studied the consequence of the explosions at the Semipalatinsk test site. The result was shocking. He found out about diseases that were never known before due to the chemical release from the explosions, strontium. It's highly toxic for humans and animals. When the chemical is inhaled or consumed, it can affect the organs.
Бомбаның құрамында залалды стронций деген не бар екен, элемент бар екен. Стронций элементі ол өте жаңағы малға да, адамға да өте жаңағы ауыр тиетін, зардап өте ауыр екен. Ол жаңағы сол жердегі өзен көлдерге түсетін болса, ішкен малдың жаңағы асқазаны күйіп сөйтіп қалатын сондай ауыр элемент екен.
Meanwhile, the arms race continued. In November 1952, the United States detonated a hydrogen bomb prototype in the Pacific Ocean created by Edward Teller. For the rest of 1952 until the middle of 1953, Soviet scientists worked hard to catch up and overtake their competitors. The first prototype was tested in August 1953 at the Semipalatinsk test site. Andrei Sakharov, father of the Soviet hydrogen bomb, said that his most passionate dream is to use thermonuclear weapons to prevent war, but it was never used for that.
Сондай бір радиацияның кесірінен аққан деген ауру пайда болды. Аққан деген енді бұрын кездеспеген, жаңа адамның бүкіл денесі қаны ағарып кетіп, содан ешқандай нәр татпай.
In our area, people didn't know what leukemia was, and they couldn't explain why people suddenly became weak and felt excruciating pain and bleeding. There were other symptoms of cancer as well. Babies were born without eyes, arms, or legs. All of these were the result of the explosions.
Сол жерде шықты. Бір көзді адамдар туған, көзі маңдайында тұратын. Сосын жаңағы бір аяғы жоқ, бір қолы жоқ, сондай адамдар да дүниеге келді қаншама.
Если говорить о медицинских последствиях, мы до конца еще даже не изучили. Даже по происшествии 40-48 лет идут очень серьезные отголоски. Число тех, которые заразились первый раз,
We haven't fully studied the consequences yet, even after 40 to 48 years of the unfortunate event. The number of those who developed diseases for the first time and the number of those who had to live with the consequences of the explosions is quite large today. For example, if we take the average percentage of widespread diseases such as the circulatory system disease, it increased by 154%, while the diseases of thyroid gland and endocrine systems are 273% respectively.
Болезни такой конкретной, как щитовидной железы, эндокринной системы, 237%.
In March 1958, the testing was stopped due to the pressure from the world community as people are starting to be against atomic and hydrogen weapons. But 3 years later, the testing resumed. The discontent within the area of the nuclear test site began to grow in Kazakhstan. People began to notice the correlation between the sickness and the testing.
Мне позвонил один человек. Он не назвал свою фамилию, свое звание, просто сказал: я вот работник аэродрома, который недалеко находится от полигона.
I received a call from someone who didn't give me his last name or his rank. He just told me that he's an employee of the airfield, which is near the polygon. A test was conducted and our dosimeter went off scale. All of the pilots were given dosimeters so that they can check the radiation level in the air. The person told me that he has children and he's there with his family. I found out that that was Chagan airfield.
Зараженность атмосферы вот этой. Вот. А у нас дети, он сказал. Мы здесь семьями. А это был аэродром Чаган. Потом я все выяснил, естественно.
Over 450 explosions, nearly 1 million lives claimed, and thousands mutilated. Olja Suleymanov couldn't remain silent. He's from a group of people called passionaries, individuals who are capable of changing the world with their talent and powerful energy. In the 1960s, he started writing poetry asking people to think, why do people reach for the stars? In the 1970s, he shocked the scientific community with his book As and I, and in the 1980s, he created an international anti-nuclear movement, which resulted in the closure of 5 nuclear test sites in the world.
1963 года нас обманывали, травили, взрывали. Да, Казахстан работал на оборону, это все понятно.
Since 1963, we've been deceived, poisoned, and blown up. Yes, Kazakhstan was involved in defense development. Yes, Kazakhstan did a great thing, becoming a victim to save the entire Soviet Union and perhaps all of humanity. We fulfilled this duty, but then we were told that the Cold War was over. America and USSR have reconciled. So why do we develop the nuclear weapons and conduct the testing?
Все время на всех частотах говорили о том, что холодная война закончилась. Все. Америка и СССР помирились. Против кого мы тогда будем развивать ядерное оружие, продолжать испытания?
And it all started with a protest at the Writers' Union, the leader of the movement recalls.
28-го состоялся этот митинг, он был очень результативный, как ясно выяснилось. Я сказал, каждый, кто подпишет наш девиз, полигон Жоэлсон.
The protest took place on the 28th and it was very successful. I said that anyone who signs our motto, the polygon, will be considered a member of the Nevada Semipalatinsk movement. the first Soviet anti-nuclear movement.
И мы в течение
We've collected over 2 million signatures from Kazakhstanis within 1 week.
недели
We were able to stop 11 of the 18 planned testing that year. The last testing was conducted on October 19, 1989, 6 months after our protests.
смогли тогда, в том году, из 18 запланированных взрывов остановить 11. Это все не попало на кинопленку, безусловно. Но для истории я это, безусловно, скажу и говорю. Последний взрыв раздался 19 октября 1989 года, через полгода после нашего митинга.
Historians say that Nursultan Nazarbayev played a big role in closing the Semipalatinsk test site. While still chairman of the Council of Ministers, he initiated the creation of a commission to monitor the environment in the region. Following the study and the published result, he called for the end of nuclear tests. In the 1980s, the head of the National Scientific Medical Center joined the Doctors of the World for the Prevention of Nuclear War movement. He remembers his trip to Japan.
Мое первое участие во Всемирном конгрессе случилось в 1986 году в Японии, а второй раз в 1989 году в Хиросиме я сделал впервые доклад о Семипалатинском ядерном полигоне. Это было
My first participation in the World Congress was in 1986 in Japan, and the second was in 1989 in Hiroshima. I wrote the first report on the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site. It was a secret, but everyone knew that the testings were done in Kazakhstan, in the Kazakh SSR, in the Semipalatinsk region. It was I who had to do this as a Soviet person. I received the consent of the Minister of Health, Evgeny Ivanovich Chazov, and the Chairman of the Council of Ministers of Kazakh SSR, Nursultan Abishevich Nazarbayev. Both of them gave their blessings to write a report on the test site.
Казахской ССР Нурсултана Абишевича Назарбаева. Они вдвоем меня благословили на то, чтобы рассекретить данные об этом полигоне.
Nursultan Nazarbayev was very active in the committee. In May 1989, he publicly raised an important subject from the rostrum of the Supreme Soviet in Moscow. His speech shocked everyone. Accusations were made. Why wash our dirty linen in public? Or why undermine the country's defense? But the first president was adamant. Nursultan Nazarbayev forced the Allied government to consider closing the testing site. The people themselves demanded this, he said. As a result, there was not a single explosion heard in the east of the republic since 1990. A year later, the long-awaited decree was signed. 40 years has passed between the introduction of the decree and the first nuclear tests.
Любой полигон, где испытывается вооружение, это плохо для народа, для населения. Вот, тем более, что изначально Казахстан не планировал у себя развивать ядерную программу. Он нам был не нужен абсолютно. Кроме этого, еще очень большое было символическое значение.
Any test sites where weapons are tested is bad for the people, for the population. Moreover, Kazakhstan didn't initially plan to develop its own nuclear program. We absolutely didn't need it. There's also a great symbolic meaning to this. It was done before the Declaration of Independence. Until December 16, 1991, Kazakhstan made a symbolic act by showing its will and showing itself as an independent state, albeit rightfully still remaining part of the Soviet Union, relying on the UN Declaration on State Sovereignty. On October 1990, Kazakhstan made its first decision after independence to close the nuclear testing site.
Один из таких первых шагов независимости, таких вот мощных, совершил именно принятием решения о запрете полигона.
Airstrikes on Japan, special decree on the opening of the testing site in Semipalatinsk, the first test of an atomic bomb, and 4 years later a thermonuclear bomb. All this happened in August and were revealed in classified documents. August is generally the atomic month. On August 29th, the ill-fated test site was closed, and it was on this date that the UN General Assembly announced the International Day Against Nuclear Tests. Bike rides, flash mobs, and scientific conferences. Those who suffered from the nuclear explosions are remembered today in different countries worldwide. According to official data, about 1 million people were exposed to radiation in Kazakhstan. In honor of those who were stronger than death, a memorial was erected near the testing site.